Long after the majestic dinosaurs vanished completely forever, another incredibly massive, beautifully peaceful giant quietly walked the earth. Its perfectly silent, deeply shadowed ancient woodland world seemed completely untouched by passing time and early mammalian life. Yet this spectacular, heavily built creature and its entire forgotten evolutionary story would eventually disappear almost completely forever. Today, very few modern people genuinely remember the remarkable existence of this magnificent, towering, early Cenozoic flightless bird. But millions of quiet prehistoric years ago, it successfully thrived here within these sprawling, misty northern green forests. This beautifully specialized, entirely flightless animal was a peaceful biological giant, completely unlike anything alive on Earth today. Its lush, remarkably diverse prehistoric natural world was incredibly ancient, breathtakingly beautiful, and ultimately, deeply and tragically fragile. For countless quiet generations, its continuous daily survival and prolonged evolutionary success seemed absolutely and entirely undeniably certain. Benevolent nature had slowly and carefully shaped an extraordinary giant animal, perfectly designed for these dense primeval environments. Then, the deeply stable, incredibly green prehistoric world slowly began to undergo a totally unexpected global climate transformation. These gradual, relentless environmental changes occurred slowly, remaining almost entirely unnoticed by the massive forest inhabitants at first. Yet the subtle, incredibly ominous signs of an approaching ecological disaster were already appearing across the northern continent. Standing quietly within an increasingly fragmented, cooling forest, the majestic bird found its future suddenly becoming deeply uncertain. A quiet, devastatingly tragic, and completely forgotten extinction story was slowly beginning within the shifting ancient northern woodland. And slowly, one of planet Earth's absolute first magnificent giant birds approached its deeply heartbreaking and final chapter. After the magnificent dinosaurs vanished, the ancient Earth transformed into a breathtakingly warm, lush, and deeply vibrant paradise. During the spectacular early Eocene epoch, dense tropical rainforests expanded dramatically across almost every single northern continental landmass. Incredibly warm global atmospheric temperatures successfully nurtured towering trees, abundant flowering plants, and remarkably complex interconnected biological ecosystems. This entirely frostless, beautifully green greenhouse world offered absolutely perfect evolutionary conditions for newly emerging terrestrial animal life. Without any massive dinosaur predators remaining, highly specialized giant birds quickly claimed the deeply shaded, peaceful forest floors. They peacefully shared these vast woodland sanctuaries alongside incredibly diverse, rapidly evolving communities of tiny primitive mammalian species. Breathtakingly rich native vegetation constantly provided an endless, completely reliable daily supply of highly nutritious seeds and fruits. Slow-moving, meandering forest rivers gracefully carved deep pathways through the heavily wooded, remarkably humid, prehistoric natural landscapes. The remarkably peaceful giant gracefully navigated these completely undisturbed jungles while foraging for exceptionally hard, tough, fibrous foods. The incredibly vibrant ecosystem safely supported healthy populations of massive avians and specialized semi-aquatic terrestrial crocodilian ambush hunters. Every single biological organism played a truly vital, completely irreplaceable ecological role within this perfectly balanced, thriving environment. Even the distant northern polar regions featured breathtakingly warm, beautifully green cypress swamps instead of bitterly freezing ice. Perfectly adapted to deep shadows, the magnificent flightless bird became an absolute master of its ancient, lush domain. To its heavy inhabitants, this incredibly boundless, deeply nurturing forest paradise felt absolutely secure and completely eternally permanent. Benevolent prehistoric nature consistently rewarded unique evolutionary adaptation with an absolutely unprecedented era of widespread global biological prosperity. This uniquely gorgeous, wonderfully quiet epoch represented a truly spectacular global rebirth following devastating worldwide massive dinosaur extinction. The magnificent Gastornis stood incredibly proudly as a gentle giant, perfectly connected to its beautiful, rapidly thriving world. However, this breathtakingly warm, flawlessly balanced lost world would unfortunately never remain completely stable or absolutely environmentally permanent. The magnificent Gastornis began its truly spectacular evolutionary journey within a recovering world completely emptied of massive dinosaurs. As incredibly rich, deeply green forests rapidly expanded across the planet, surviving bird lineages inherited vast ecological opportunities. Its earliest ancient ancestors were relatively small, fully flighted birds remarkably closely related to modern ducks and geese, without large terrestrial mammalian predators threatening them. These unique early birds bravely descended onto the peaceful forest floors, finding highly abundant plant resources securely hidden within dense woodlands. Relentless natural selection fundamentally transformed their specialized bodies. Across countless quiet generations, their functional wings gradually shrank completely, while their powerful hind limbs grew significantly heavier. This truly extraordinary, highly independent evolutionary acquisition of profound terrestrial gigantism represented an incredibly successful biological survival strategy. Eventually, the magnificent, fully realized Gastornis gracefully emerged to peacefully wander throughout the deeply shadowed ancient European woodlands. Its famously massive, spectacularly deep crushing beak evolved specifically to successfully process extremely tough forest seeds and nuts. During the incredibly warm early Eocene epoch, these legendary gentle giants successfully migrated across vast northern land bridges. They eventually conquered perfectly pristine forests, stretching continuously from Europe toward ancient North America and distant Eastern Asia. This spectacular flightless bird perfectly symbolized a beautiful, completely rebuilt world, flourishing brilliantly after devastating global dinosaur extinction. Absolutely everything about the magnificent Gastornis was perfectly designed for successful biological survival within dense ancient northern forests. Its massive, heavily built body featured broad, beautifully veined contour feathers, providing essential daily thermoregulation and environmental waterproofing. Incredibly strong, exceptionally robust hind limbs safely supported immense physical body weights, easily exceeding 150 kilograms. Their tridactyl feet ended with broad, remarkably blunt triangular phalanges specifically adapted for stable terrestrial walking, not hunting. This highly specialized, completely graviportal skeletal architecture naturally dictated a very deliberately slow, steady, and peaceful plantigrade gait. Its absolute most famous and undeniably impressive anatomical feature was an exceptionally deep, laterally compressed, massive, crushing beak. Completely lacking any sharp predatory raptorial hook, this massively built straight beak functioned perfectly for processing tough vegetation. Enormous jaw muscles attached securely onto the deep temporal fossae, beautifully generating absolutely tremendous mechanical compressive crushing forces. These powerful giants deliberately swallowed small internal gizzard stones to successfully help grind extremely tough fibrous woodland forage. At least 13 incredibly massive, heavily specialized cervical vertebrae flawlessly supported the immense physical weight of its skull. While its terrestrial legs grew incredibly massive, its unnecessary feathered wings became completely vestigial and entirely functionally useless. Without any need for powered atmospheric flight, the flat avian sternum entirely lost its essential, deeply pronounced keel. Advanced modern chemical isotope analysis flawlessly proves these magnificent, misunderstood ancient animals exclusively consumed deeply nutritious forest vegetation. They were absolutely never terrifying, ruthless apex mammalian predators, but rather incredibly peaceful, beautifully specialized giant forest herbivores. The remarkably warm, deeply stable ancient Eocene climate provided absolutely perfect ecological conditions for sustaining extreme biological gigantism. With absolutely zero significant native dinosaur predators remaining, this heavily built avian vegetarian easily conquered the northern continents. Standing an astonishing 2 meters tall, it completely dominated its lush woodland undergrowth like a majestic feathered titan. However, its incredibly specialized evolutionary adaptations would eventually become a deeply fatal weakness when global temperatures suddenly plummeted. Each quiet morning began beneath the beautifully ancient canopy, where the magnificent Gastornis awoke to completely peaceful surroundings. Its entire daily existence revolved around peacefully finding abundant fresh food, clean drinking water, and absolute terrestrial safety. The remarkably lush, deeply humid Eocene forest environment naturally provided absolutely countless essential resources for continuous biological survival. Much of its peaceful day was spent slowly foraging across the deeply shadowed, incredibly rich ancient woodland floor. Deep ancestral experience successfully guided every single daily foraging decision throughout the dense, highly complex ancient green undergrowth. Its highly specialized, incredibly powerful crushing beak effortlessly broke through exceptionally hard forest nuts and tough plant seeds. These massive, gentle birds deliberately swallowed small river stones to effectively help digest heavily fibrous, prehistoric plant material. Beautiful, slow-moving forest rivers perfectly shape their daily terrestrial movements across the remarkably vast prehistoric natural landscape. Accessing clean, completely reliable freshwater sources always remained absolutely essential for maintaining their truly immense physical biological bulk. Leaving beautifully distinct tridactyl footprints behind, they utilized a very slow, completely deliberate walking gait across muddy riverbanks. Although mostly solitary wanderers, isolated individuals occasionally crossed paths peacefully within the exceptionally dense, heavily shaded green jungles. Subtle physical body language and quiet behavioral displays successfully helped maintain territory without provoking highly dangerous biological conflicts. Deeply hidden ground nests carefully protected their remarkably large, incredibly precious eggs from highly opportunistic early mammalian scavengers. Weighing over 1 kilogram each, these absolutely massive eggs represented a profound biological investment towards securing future generations. Remarkably independent newborn chicks grew incredibly rapidly, quickly developing enough physical strength to forage completely autonomously, outdoors safely. The beautiful ancient forest could be deeply challenging and intensely dangerous for the highly vulnerable young-growing birds. Daily biological survival heavily depended upon careful observation and continuous practical experience within the deeply complex green undergrowth. While massive adults feared absolutely nothing, they remained constantly vigilant against terrestrial crocodilians hiding near murky prehistoric shorelines. In the distant northern polar forests, they successfully survived prolonged winter darkness by peacefully consuming deeply buried tubers. The giant birds shared their beautiful ecosystem completely harmoniously alongside tiny, rapidly diversifying primitive, Paleogene mammalian animal species. During the absolutely hottest daylight hours, these massive feathered giants rested completely peacefully beneath comforting green forest shade. Their incredibly broad, beautifully veined body feathers flawlessly provided essential thermoregulation against the deeply humid prehistoric environment. The incredibly vibrant woodland environment constantly evolved through completely predictable, remarkably stable ancient seasonal weather and climate cycles. Remarkable behavioral flexibility and highly adaptable daily foraging strategies constantly improved their overall biological survival odds absolutely immensely. For many millions of quiet prehistoric years, this profoundly beautiful, completely natural ecological balance endured absolutely imperfectly. As warm golden sunlight slowly faded away completely, the remarkably peaceful daytime naturally came to a quiet end. Another highly successful, incredibly beautiful day of quiet terrestrial foraging had passed entirely within the magnificent ancient forest. Yet beneath this absolute tranquility, entirely hidden biological weaknesses remain quietly waiting for devastating, rapid global climate changes. Even the absolute most biologically successful prehistoric species can tragically carry deeply hidden, completely inescapable evolutionary survival risks. Successful terrestrial reproduction absolutely required incredibly significant biological investment, severely limiting their total overall population growth rates continuously. Their entire evolutionary future depended dangerously upon successfully hatching an incredibly limited number of massive, highly vulnerable eggs. These newly hatched, highly precocial juveniles constantly faced many terrifying terrestrial dangers before successfully reaching their full adulthood. Achieving physical maturity and absolute biological survival took considerable time within the deeply complex, highly competitive woodland environment. Tragically, absolutely not every single young generation successfully survived the completely unforgiving, intensely challenging prehistoric early Eocene wilderness. Because these enormous flightless birds naturally occupied vast distant territories, their overall regional population growth remained incredibly gradual. Any sudden demographic losses or small regional population declines could rapidly become absolutely impossible to biologically reverse completely. Their extreme biological dependence upon deeply stable, highly continuous tropical forest habitats unfortunately created an incredibly profound vulnerability. When familiar climatic conditions suddenly change, Their highly specialized, deeply terrestrial biological adaptation ultimately reached its absolute limits. Any potential evolutionary recovery depended entirely upon their beloved, densely shaded ancient woodland world remaining completely deeply familiar. But soon that incredibly stable, profoundly beautiful greenhouse world would tragically begin to change absolutely and irrevocably forever. Following the remarkably warm early Eocene climatic optimum, global atmospheric temperatures slowly began a deeply devastating downward decline. Previously dependable, deeply humid tropical climates progressively transformed into increasingly seasonal, completely unfamiliar cooler ancient global weather patterns. As global cooling relentlessly accelerated, the absolutely vast, continuous northern hemisphere swamp forests tragically started shrinking incredibly rapidly. Beautiful, unbroken dark woodland canopies slowly opened, forcefully replacing deeply shadowed environments with uncomfortably bright, drier open scrublands. Because they evolved exclusively for dense jungle navigation, these massive birds struggled terribly crossing newly exposed open spaces. Their highly specialized, incredibly powerful seed-crushing beaks suddenly became entirely useless against unfamiliar, newly evolving tough vegetation. Regional rainfall drastically diminished, slowly turning historically reliable, deeply comforting freshwater streams into completely dry, barren, dusty pathways. As protective forests desperately retreated, the heavily built, flightless gentle giants tragically lost their beloved natural woodland sanctuaries. The completely unavoidable, steadily increasing ecological fragmentation drastically isolated surviving populations, absolutely devastating their regional genetic biological diversity. Simultaneously, rapidly diversifying mammalian herbivores began aggressively competing against them for rapidly dwindling, highly precious terrestrial food resources. These incredibly swift, highly adaptable hooved mammals effortlessly navigated the increasingly open, newly expanding, dry prehistoric grassland savannas. Unable to successfully outrun faster competitors, the massive ground birds found themselves facing an absolutely impossible evolutionary disadvantage. Furthermore, completely new, highly efficient mammalian carnivores gradually appeared, actively threatening their once perfectly safe terrestrial ground nests. With increasingly dangerous predators hunting effectively across open landscapes, successfully raising highly vulnerable offspring became incredibly biologically difficult. Their beautifully specialized, heavily built graviportal bodies simply could not evolve quickly enough against these cascading ecological disasters. Relentless environmental transformation completely erased the deeply shadowed, heavily forested paradise that originally nurtured their magnificent biological gigantism. Cut off from essential dense woodland resources, starving individuals wandered aimlessly through a completely hostile, foreign ancient landscape. The beautiful, perfectly balanced first forest world had shattered, pushing the gentle giant toward completely inevitable biological extinction. The gradual but absolutely relentless global climate cooling permanently devastated the deeply humid, wonderfully continuous ancient northern forests. Each subsequent generation tragically faced incredibly insurmountable daily survival challenges within their rapidly shrinking, highly fragmented woodland habitats. The magnificent, majestic giant birds simply could not successfully adapt their highly specialized, heavy bodies for open savannas. Their incredibly powerful, completely specialized seed-crushing beaks became totally useless against newly evolving, completely unfamiliar dry vegetation. Incredibly fast-moving, highly adaptable mammalian herbivores aggressively outcompeted the slow-walking birds for rapidly disappearing food resources. Furthermore, highly efficient new mammalian carnivores ruthlessly targeted their highly vulnerable ground nests and completely helpless young chicks. Without any secure forest sanctuaries remaining, these desperately fragmented final populations quickly reached their absolute evolutionary survival limits. The once completely dominant, incredibly widespread ancient flightless birds slowly retreated into tiny, deeply isolated geographical forest pockets, tragically reproducing slowly through massive single eggs, completely prevented any meaningful biological recovery against these absolutely overwhelming pressures. Beautifully adapted for perfectly stable jungle environments, their ancient evolutionary design suddenly became a deeply fatal biological weakness. The magnificent, heavily built, gentle giants slowly starved while wandering aimlessly across the increasingly barren, utterly open terrain. Small remaining family groups desperately struggled to endure within the very last surviving patches of deep northern forest. Unforgiving natural selection ruthlessly eliminated the spectacular avian titans from the radically changing, deeply unfamiliar global prehistoric landscape. By the Middle Eocene epoch, the very last living Gastornis tragically faced absolutely inevitable, completely permanent biological extinction. The deeply heartbreaking, incredibly slow decline of this peaceful vegetarian giant concluded a truly magnificent, unprecedented evolutionary chapter. Their deeply terrifying, completely inescapable biological demise quietly proved that no successful prehistoric species remains forever completely invincible. Eventually, these extraordinary giant birds completely disappeared from the ancient European and distant North American terrestrial woodland ecosystems. The rapidly transforming, increasingly open prehistoric world completely moved forward entirely without its absolute greatest feathered forest king. Empty, deeply silent ancient woodlands replaced the once vibrant habitats where the magnificent heavy-footed birds formerly wandered. The beautiful fading golden sunlight slowly descended upon a rapidly cooling world, now completely devoid of giant birds. Only scattered, completely buried fossilized bones remain silently hidden deeply beneath the rapidly accumulating ancient Eocene sedimentary earth. Their remarkable, beautifully unique evolutionary lineage abruptly terminated forever after 15 million years of absolute terrestrial forest dominance. The devastatingly tragic disappearance of Gastornis perfectly illustrates the deeply profound biological vulnerability of highly specialized prehistoric life. The magnificent, completely peaceful giant bird simply could not survive the deeply unforgiving, completely relentless global environmental transformation. Absolute silence tragically fell across the ancient northern forests where these massive, heavy, flightless giants once peacefully ruled. A spectacular, deeply beautiful lost world completely faded away, alongside its absolute most iconic, completely irreplaceable avian inhabitant. The deeply heartbreaking extinction story of the giant Gastornis remains a profound historic testament to ancient ecological fragility. The lonely, beautifully majestic silhouette of the Gastornis slowly faded completely away into eternal, ancient prehistoric forest mist. The magnificent ancient forests continue growing, but their absolute greatest, most iconic feathered giant was completely gone forever. Fortunately, scattered fossilized bones remain silently buried deep within the rapidly accumulating early Cenozoic sedimentary earth layers forever. Remarkable discoveries across Europe and North America eventually allowed modern paleontologists to successfully reconstruct this completely forgotten animal. Detailed fossilized footprints perfectly preserved deeply within ancient riverbeds provide breathtaking glimpses into their peaceful terrestrial walking behaviors. Incredible Arctic fossils from Ellesmere Island beautifully demonstrate exactly how these magnificent birds survived incredibly warm, prehistoric winters. Advanced isotopic bone analysis completely overturned frightening old myths, flawlessly proving Gastornis was actually a gentle giant herbivore. These incredibly spectacular reconstructed museum skeletons perfectly connect our modern world directly back toward an entirely ancient kingdom. The deeply heartbreaking extinction of this magnificent giant bird stands as a profound warning regarding sudden environmental change. They perfectly symbolize the breathtaking biological rebirth of planet Earth following the devastating global non-avian dinosaur mass extinction. Although their beautifully continuous ancient northern forests completely disappeared, the magnificent legacy of Gastornis will absolutely endure forever. Absolute silence falls heavily across the vast modern woodlands, where these magnificent, heavy-footed beasts once roamed peacefully. Today, we remember this extraordinary ancient creature not as a terrifying monster, but as a wonderfully peaceful giant. The remarkably beautiful, incredibly gentle Gastornis finally fades away entirely into the deeply eternal mist of ancient history.